for dialing in for today's Saturday afternoon webinar. My name is Tushar Madrasinghe. I'm the president of the Association of Professional Sri Lankans in the UK, and it's good to see many of you, some new names as well as not so new names. So just to remind everyone, this webinar is recorded, and we have a truly global audience today. So our speaker, Priyantha Wijayatunga, he's dialing in from Philippines. We got friends from Sri Lanka, as well as known contacts in Dubai. Peter Buxton, I know very well, he's dialing in from Scotland, and Ajit from the USA. So a truly global audience for a well-suited topic about crucial role in renewable energy. So just a few housekeeping things. Yeah, it's going to be recorded, and also everyone will be muted. If you have questions while Priyantha, the speaker, is talking, please type them in the chat box, and myself and Gihant will be picking them up after Priyantha has presented. The whole thing should last 1 hour, 15 minutes, that's including a discussion part. Priyantha's presentation is about 25 minutes. So I hope you find this interesting. Now, being a Sri Lankan organization, I just want to mention a few things. We're all aware about the current situation in Sri Lanka. It's got challenging times, and APSL today continues to play a key role. And just to pick up on some of the projects we're doing, the Emergency Relief Fund, which is continuing to give the vital assistance and necessity items to Sri Lanka in terms of medical aids. And on this slide, you can see, so the medical aid recruitment so far in the last 3 months to over 30 hospitals, medical items, equipment, and medicines. So we're continuing that relief aid. We know there's many more challenges that the country is going on, but we're not going to go into detail here. But I think associations like this, organizations like this, who are based outside the country, should continue to do more. And we are continuing to do the maximum we can. And I'm sure numerous other organizations, Hela Sarana, a load of other associations are doing the same thing and continue to do their bit to the motherland. Other work that the association does is the Cancer Relief Fund, the scholarships that we're giving to students, the solar village that we've built, and also mentoring schemes and any assistance that we can give to the country that we're all aware about. So this slide here shows a snapshot of our activities, and we've got all the social media presence in terms of our website, the Facebook updates, LinkedIn, and Twitter. So please follow us and get information from myself or any of these channels here. Other things I want to mention about the work we do in the UK, webinars like this, so the WE Sri Lanka webinars, which Gihanta will be talking to you about, and also Living in the UK series, and also mentoring schemes that the association continues to build up and conduct. So that's just a snapshot of the activities we do. So please refer to all our social media presence, and you can find out more. But it's good to see close to 40 people on today. Right, so that's my brief introduction. I'm just going to hand it over to Gihanta Jayasinghe. Gihanta is our EXCO member and the project lead for the WE Sri Lanka project. So Gihanta, I'm going to mute myself and I'm going to hand it over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tushara. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar by the head of the Energy Division, covering climate change and sustainable development at the Asian Development Bank, Mr. Priyantha Wijayatunga. And he will be giving a talk about the crucial role of renewable energy in overcoming the climate and power crises that we see in the world today, including Sri Lanka, and also winning that race to net zero, which is now a global strategy. We bring this webinar to you from APSL and our project, WE Sri Lanka. WE Sri Lanka, the purpose of our initiative is to build thought leadership, awareness, and the capacity for an inclusive and a shared future for all Sri Lankans, sustainable development, and going forward also, importantly, effective governance. We started our project in 2010 at the end of the conflict in Sri Lanka. And our purpose then was to build reconciliation and nurture inclusivity amongst the different communities that make up our beloved country. We had talks by eminent people. We had panel discussions involving leaders of different communities of the Sri Lankan diaspora here in the UK and youth groups. We had audience participation workshops, Sinhala and Tamil cultural performances, and all of this was done to build brotherhood, reconciliation, better understanding, and clearly to strengthen the peace that was achieved after many years. We also raised funds to support the disabled, orphans and widows after the war. And as a part of raising those funds, we also developed our first solar village, where WE Sri Lanka and the solar village projects of APSL came together. The solar village program originated by Professor Dharmadasa now. We're looking at over 5 solar villages in Sri Lanka and more to come. But the WE Sri Lanka project and the solar village project came together to establish one in the Vanni region, and that solar roof is now generating energy for this community, which was made up from refugees from the previous conflict. And working with our local partner, the Foundation of Goodness, there is also now a village empowerment center established there along with the solar village to help improve education and training for children and women in the local area. Finally, the new thrust of the WE Sri Lanka initiative is to build awareness, strengthen thought leadership around those themes of inclusivity, sustainable development, and effective governance going forward. And you can see here the eminent speakers we have had in the past who have spoken around the themes of renewable energy, reconciliation, youth for reconciliation, and now we're very happy to welcome Priyantha Wijayatunga, who will talk about, as I mentioned earlier, the crucial role of renewable energy to fight the climate and energy crises. So we're really privileged to have a person of the knowledge and eminence as Priyantha with us. He can, I think, bring some fantastic perspectives to this theme, both from a Sri Lankan and an international perspective. Priyantha is the founder, Director General of the Public Utilities Commission of Sri Lanka. He was a senior professor of electrical engineering and the founder dean of the Faculty of Information Technology at the University of Moratuwa. He's also a former director of the Ceylon Electricity Board and the Sri Lanka Sustainable Energy Authority. He was closely involved in drafting the Sri Lanka Electricity Act. And this is, of course, very interesting because, as we all know, we have had a lot of legislation coming through very recently. And I'm sure a lot of you will have some questions to Priyantha about that legislation as we go forward. And he was also involved in setting up the Sri Lanka Sustainable Energy Authority and a lead author of Sri Lanka's initial national communication on climate change, which of course is a very relevant topic given that we had COP26 in Glasgow last year, and in a few months' time we'll have COP27 in Egypt. Priyantha was an academic visitor to Imperial College from 1993 to 98, contributing to research on the costing of electricity transmission network services in the UK and Chile. He was a chairman of the South Asia Forum for Infrastructure Regulators, and also associated with the Melbourne Energy Institute as well. Priyantha has extensively contributed to the field of energy policy and regulation and has co-authored over 75 publications. So I think all of this says what a lot of expertise and experience we have, and we're really looking forward now to Priyantha's presentation. Over to you, Priyantha, and I will stop sharing and you can share your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gihanta. Let me quickly look at my file. Hope I can.
Yes, it's on there, Priyantha. It's coming through.
Thanks, Priyantha. Yeah,
excellent.
that's fine.
Excellent. Yes. First of all, let me thank Gihanta and Tushar for inviting me for this webinar. It's a great pleasure to be here. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you wherever you're joining from. As I can see, you're joining from the US. It must be early morning, and then the UK, of course, afternoon. But I am taking your time, on a weekend and midday. That's going to be tough, I know, in a place like the UK, because you plan everything on the weekend. So thank you very much for joining, and I'll take you through this presentation. As the title itself shows, it's going to be I'm going to look at the renewable energy development concentrating on Sri Lanka. I might take a few examples from outside whenever it's appropriate, and then how we are going to address the climate crisis and how Sri Lanka can contribute to it as we go along. So the presentation outline, I'll quickly run through Sri Lanka energy sector. Most of you all already may know the form of the energy sector, what kind of energy resources we have. But I'll just to start the presentation, I think I should concentrate on that a little bit too. And then as far as Sri Lanka is concerned, what are the global commitments Sri Lanka has? Because most of the time people tend to forget that part of the story, because eventually if we sign off for something globally to agree with the global commitments, then we have to eventually implement it. And that's something which we always forget when it comes to the local context. And then what are the challenges we have when it comes to meeting these global commitments, or eventually in this particular instance, renewable energy development. Then how are you going to finance or overcome these challenges? Eventually, financing is one of the most important part of those investments of the challenge, overcoming challenges. Then a few final remarks to take the message through. So if you carefully look at Sri Lanka's energy profile, the consumption pattern, you would be surprised if you look at this picture. I'm sure most of you all must be knowing. Over the last 40 years or so, still biomass dominates as the final energy consumption. Mind you, this is the final energy consumption. What goes into the final, user. And coal is, of course, a small bit, because in the final energy consumption, coal is not a major player. Coal, of course, going into electricity production. And that, if you look at the electricity usage, you can see how small that is as against the rest of it. So in terms of final energy consumption, still petroleum and biomass dominates, and over 90%, somewhere there. So if you're going to think of renewable energy, if you're thinking of net zero emissions, you can see where you have to concentrate your efforts on. Now, if you look at the power sector, you can see how power sector, consumption is here. As late as about 1992, if I can remember right, we had almost 100% hydropower. And then gradually, of course, hydropower, contribution has gone down. Naturally, because we did not have large hydropower plants coming in, and hydro resources are limited. Though we have a lot of resources, roughly about those days we used to say that we have about 2,000 megawatts. That's in terms of capacity, but energy-wise it may be slightly different. But that is not expanding that much. But then the gradual increase in demand for electricity is being more or less filled with thermal power resources, oil, and lately with coal, as you can see here. And at the same time, of course, from mid-1990s, we have been concentrating on what we call non-conventional renewable energy, because hydropower is renewable energy. Hydropower has been there from, let's say, as early as early 20th century. In the tea plantations, we have had over 500, small hydro plants. But then large hydro started somewhere around 1950 with old Laksapana commissioning in 1950. And since then, we have had regular, addition of hydropower, but they are large hydro. In our terms, we call it large hydropower. They are not really large per se when it comes to overall hydropower contributions in the world, because the old Laksapana power plant is only 8.33 megawatts into 3 turbines. So it's not big, only 25 megawatts. But then we have what we call non-conventional renewable energy, that is, without large hydropower, the rest. As you can see from this graph, from mid-90s, this non-conventional renewable energy has been picking up. And in recent years, the expansion has been relatively good. And you can see that in the graph on the right-hand side in absolute terms. And at the same time, of course, coal has been contributing a lot too, because of the absence of any other base load power plants like hydro, and the rest is picked up by oil. In fact, but if you look at the latest, hydropower is roughly about 1/3. The rest is all thermal, oil and coal. In fact, oil is dominating at the moment. That's the whole problem we have back in Sri Lanka now. We don't have money to get oil down. So what are the salient features? As I said, heavy dependence on imported energy, coal and liquid fuels, petroleum, both in the power sector as well as in the transport sector. Of course, transport sector, you can't do much because still we are running with diesel engines and internal combustion engines with gasoline and diesel. But the sad story is power sector is also, almost 1/3 or even more is run with liquid fuel power plants, petroleum. And as you know, petroleum prices have gone to roof, and we are paying, dearly because of that for electricity costs. And I don't know whether you all know, before the petroleum prices went up and we had all these issues, the average cost of electricity production in Sri Lanka was roughly around 21 rupees a unit. And now, of course, sale price is lower. That's a problem with the electricity board. But if you look at now, it can be as high as about 75 rupees a unit. Still, the selling price is only 16 rupees, and that's the sad story in the power sector. So, as I said, almost 50% of the supply final energy demand is dominated by biomass, and this is mainly used for household cooking. Though you and I may have gas for cooking, most of the people in rural areas, they still use a lot of biomass for cooking, and that goes for cooking. And then industrial activities, a lot of industries still use biomass, which is a good thing as long as the biomass comes from sustainable resources, sustainable biomass plantations, which is mostly the case in Sri Lanka. So industries like tile mills and brick kilns and all these use a lot of biomass. Then in commercial activities, still some of the small boutiques and so on still use biomass. So overall, almost 50% coming from biomass, the energy consumption, final energy consumption. Now here, this is a very interesting graph, some of the salient features. Significant component of our export earnings at the moment goes for importation of oil. And it is as high as about 35%. Can you believe it? If you take out petroleum-related exports, because we have petroleum-related exports because of the, of course, for aircrafts and the ships, we provide fuel, and that's petroleum-related exports. In a way, they are called exports. They are put into the category as exports. As you can see here, huge component of our export earnings go just to import petroleum fuels. That's enormous, and now it may be even higher because of the high oil prices. So which means there is a huge pressure on balance of payments. Where are we going to get dollars? Because most of the dollars which we earn, we have to spend on oil, and we have to import other things. We depend a lot for a lot of food imports, and that's why the dollar crisis. And how do we handle this? We do have short-term borrowings, and then for those we need external guarantees actually. So when the country is at risk, when the risk level of the country goes down, then what happens? It goes up. What happens is the borrowing costs go up, and external guarantees, the cost of external guarantees go up, and as a result, the whole economy suffers a lot. So these are issues which we have to deal with in a situation like this, and obviously, the energy sector contributes a lot to this situation. Okay, let's look at the global commitment. I just looked at it. Of course, I knew some of these things, but for the presentation, I quickly looked at these commitments. But we have nationally determined contributions recently updated, actually. 2021, end of 2021, just before COP26 in Glasgow, they updated this. And plan to reduce GHG emissions during the period 21 to 2030 by 14.5%. It doesn't elaborate. Probably it is from the baseline of business as usual case. And this includes major part of it will have to come from the power sector, transport sector, industries, waste, and so on. Then if you specifically look at the power sector, all of us know government plan, renewable energy should contribute to about 70% of the power supplies by 2030. Of course, it doesn't say whether it's energy or power, but eventually I think it has to be energy, otherwise 70% doesn't mean much to the power sector. And then we have declared that we are going to be carbon neutral in the power sector. Mind you, it's not the whole country, in the power sector by 2050, which is an enormous task. Because if it is only 70% renewable energy, then the other 30% will have to be somehow the other carbon neutral in some form. And the other important thing is that it is declared, Sri Lanka has declared that no more coal power additions. So no coal power plants will be added. And later on, you will see it's going to be replaced with gas-fired power stations. And the other interesting thing is that along with carbon neutrality by 2050, you have seen banning agrochemical and chemical fertilizer, banning single-use plastics, promoting e-mobility, promoting circular economy. Of course, last two are more or less ongoing. It's an ongoing exercise. And as you know, the first point, we have had a lot of issues and which impacted hugely on food security, actually. Because these have been more or less actions taken by the government in recent times. Some of those have been reversed, as you know, things like the first bullet chemical fertilizer use. Now we have started using them again. So what are the specific actions in the power sector as committed by in this NDCs? They call it national determined contributions. Large and small hydropower to be until 2030 added about 300 megawatts to the system. At the moment, I think we have about almost 1,500 megawatts. And so that's quite a task. This should include most probably Maoya, Broadlands already completed. And I don't think there are any other large hydropower stations. Okay, except Morogoro, we have 30 megawatts, which Asian Development Bank is funding at the moment. So 300 megawatts altogether, including small hydropower. Then wind power, 800 megawatts. And then solar power, 2,000 megawatts. As you can see here, most of the additions which we plan should come from wind power and solar power. And so solar takes about 2,000 megawatts. That's quite a big amount. I think currently, I'm not sure how much we have, maybe about 400 megawatts or so. And energy efficiency to be vigorously pursued, demand-side energy efficiency programs. We have had a fantastic demand-side energy efficiency programs since 1990s. As you know, the energy efficient LAMP program, we converted from, transformed from incandescent lamps to CFLs. Now, huge interest in LEDs, and that the market itself has taken off, and nobody has to do much about it. And in Sri Lanka, we should be proud of. But then you have to think of other things like efficient refrigerators, efficient air conditioners, and so on. Then promoting new technologies. Wherever we can get new technologies to assist efficiency improvements, then we should promote, and that is part of the actions embedded in the national income contributions. Then supply side efficiency improvements, that is on the electricity supply side, for the transmission and distribution efficiency improvements. Now here also I must admit that we have done a great job in Sri Lanka. And when I left Sri Lanka for the Asian Development Bank, the overall system losses was somewhere in the range of 18.5% of the total generation. That is 18.5% of total generation is lost in between before it reaches the consumer. It used to be the case. Now it has gone down to less than 9% over the last 15 years or so, which is a great achievement. So supply side efficiency improvements have been going on, and it's going to be even more emphasized. Fuel switching, conversion of oil-fired power plants to operate with natural gas. That's another commitment. So once the natural gas terminals are in place, the government is planning to convert oil-fired stations, particularly those in Colombo and Kerawalapitiya power plants. All of them are operating at the moment either with heavy fuels or diesel, auto diesel, and all these will have to be converted to natural gas. Then, as I said, there will not be any coal power plants, but if you look at, if you have ever looked at the generation expansion plan, which we had a few years ago, we had a long list of coal power plants, a huge, a long list. And now all those are to be replaced with gas-fired power plants, because in climate change agenda, gas is considered to be a transitional fuel. Of course, as we go on, there will be even restrictions for that, because it's there will be carbon locking issues associated with gas-fired power plants. So clean energy helps, I don't have to tell you, minimize the use of imported energy sources, and particularly in a place like Sri Lanka, where it really matters when everything is imported. Naturally, it matters if you can minimize the use of such sources. And power sector, shift from coal to oil to renewables, coal and oil to renewables. That's important. That's a contribution which renewable energy can provide. And the other important thing is transport sector. If you are to clean up the transport sector or go for carbon neutrality or low carbon transport sector, you have to shift to electric vehicles with green energy. It will have to be clean energy. You cannot have electric vehicles running with charged with coal-fired power plants, and then the whole purpose is lost. And so we'll have to have renewable energy and green hydrogen, etc. And household and commercial. Naturally, if you want to go for clean energy, you go for carbon neutrality or low carbon in household and commercial. You need to shift as much as possible to electricity, and electricity should be generated from clean energy. Industrial sector is the same story. And of course, there are very difficult sectors, hard to abate sectors like cement and steel, where it's very difficult to get fossil fuels out. But we should try our best to bring electricity to the industrial sector, thereby bringing clean energy, eventually providing energy needs. And then what are the opportunities in Sri Lanka? The most important thing is that how fast we can bring in these renewable energies and put it into the system. Solar has the biggest advantage. It's very fast to deploy. You can put up a solar power, reasonably significantly big solar power plant within a matter of 1 year maximum. And because you can bring in modules and just install them and connect it to the system. Obviously, the site preparation might take a while, but otherwise you can deploy fast. But mind you, in Sri Lanka, land is a constraint. People talk of solar, people talk of renewable energy, but Sri Lanka is a densely populated country, one of the most densely populated countries in South Asia, probably next to Bangladesh. You may not realize it. And we need to keep the tree cover, we need to keep the forest cover. And the land, if you have alternative users, you are looking at the opportunity cost of land. And you can't go and put up your renewable energy plant if the land can be used for agriculture or anything else. And so you have to be very mindful of the land constraints Sri Lanka has. And then when it comes to wind, onshore and offshore wind. Of course, at the moment, we have a lot of now huge emphasis on onshore wind. We have not exploited onshore geographical areas as yet totally, but offshore also is possible, particularly somewhere around MENA. We have very good wind resources. In biomass, naturally, if you want biomass to be used, they can be used with sustainable plantations or sustainable supplies. And hydro, as I said, large, almost fully exploited, large hydropower, but mini and micro hydro is still possible and continue to have opportunities. Then waste. Incineration should be the last resort. We should, at the moment, I think the power plant what we have is based on incineration. Waste incineration is the last thing we should do. First, we should reuse, recycle, and then only you should think of incineration, because incineration is bad for environment. Then what are the challenges to developing clean energy? Institutional system inertia. If you go talk to any of the institutions in the country dealing with power sector, it's impossible to deal with them. You have the system inertia, resistance for change, mindset of the people. That's the toughest part you have to overcome in a country like Sri Lanka. And the other important thing is lack of systematic approaches and treatment. We are talking about private sector, bringing private sector, developing renewable energy and so on, but you don't see a systematic approach. Of course, there are rules and regulations, but sometimes these rules and regulations are not really followed. And as I have put in here, inconsistency across institutions. You go to Sustainable Energy Authority, you hear something, you go to Sri Lanka Electricity Board, you hear another, you go to Foreign Energy Ministry, you hear another third version. So inconsistency is across these institutions, and that's an issue. And the other, the biggest problem is weak regulatory environment. The regulator is there, of course. I set up the regulatory agency, sad to say that, but it's one of the weakest institutions as I can see from its functions. I am not hesitating to say that. It will have to be stronger than this. It will have to take regulatory measures, strong regulatory measures whenever it's required. It's not happening. When it comes to financing, lack of capacity in local financing institutes, that's one thing. If you go to walk into a bank, it's a bit difficult to get financing from clean energy investment, because banking system is not ready. Of course, it's much better than it used to be 20 years ago, but it may not, still you need a lot of capacity within the banking system. And the other, of course, because of the country risk, the cost of capital is very high. To tell you, probably nobody will come and invest on any power plant or any of these facilities as it stands now. Because today country risk is, as you know, it's almost default, not almost default, probably default rating. And that's not easy for a country to, that kind of a country will find it very difficult to attract capital. And so high cost of capital eventually is a big challenge. But at the same time, I have to tell you there are challenges in energy, clean energy solutions also. Now, one of the important things is technical. Provision of same energy services as of conventional plants. We talk of a lot of renewable energy, but the important thing is that the renewable energy power plant should provide the same energy services of that of a conventional plant. That's not easy to come by when you have intermittent power. So you need to accompany that with storage, maybe pump storage, maybe hydro storage, maybe energy battery storage, and then put together it becomes costlier. And then the system reliability, stability issues. So as a result of intermittency, system becomes unstable sometimes. Just to give you one example, we don't know the final conclusion or the final finding, but we had blackouts recently in Sri Lanka. And when they try to restore the power system, the last part of the country to restore was Colombo. You wouldn't believe it, because usually it should be the first part of the country to be restored when it comes to restoration of power supply. Why? They suspect it is because of solar rooftop systems. Because of the technical nature and the response of the solar rooftop system, sometimes it's not that easy when it comes to system stability. So it tripped off several times before it really got connected eventually. And those are the issues what we need to think of when it comes to renewable energy. Safeguard issues, environmental concerns. You may think that these are some of the best solutions for energy, sector. But I know how difficult it was to put up this wind power plant in MENA because we financed it. Asian Development Bank financed the 100 megawatt wind power plant. And we had to go through hell when it comes to environmental issues. Wildlife, birds, it's a bird migratory route. And we had to bring in a lot of new technologies. And in fact, you may not know, we put up a radar-based bird detecting system to switch off and switch on wind turbines when the birds move around. And so that's not easy. And then noise. Noise is a huge problem with wind power plant. And so we had to address that issue. There's social safeguards, disruption of livelihoods. If you take small hydro, if you go and walk around in some of the small hydro power plants which you find in Sri Lanka, you see beyond the weir almost no water during the dry season. What do? You all block that water, which is to be used by people along the stream, and they don't have water for various things, day-to-day activities. So these are issues which you need to really address when it comes to renewable energy. Then, as I said, land availability, water availability, because if you are going to use solar, you need to wash solar panels on a regular basis. And these are issues which you have to deal with. So I don't want to go into go through this in detail. What is important is, if you are talking of globally, they say that if you want to achieve net zero by 2050, electricity as the final energy use will have to play a major role. That means everything what we do at the consumer level will have to be with electricity as your source of energy supply. That means your car will have to be an electric car, your cooking will have to be electric, and all this electricity will have to come from clean energy. And so that's the emphasis here. And what it means is that clean energy investments have to accelerate. And it's so many gigawatts of renewable energy per every month or something. And I don't want to go into numbers. E-mobility will have to increase, as I said. Drastic reduction in energy intensity. That means what we produce per, a number of the GDP per unit of electricity will have to go up. Energy intensity will have to go down drastically. In fact, the estimate is by 2030, global economy will grow by about 40% compared to now, and energy use will have to go down by 7%, even though global economy increases by 40%. So you can see energy intensity improvements required if you are to achieve, these targets of 2050 net zero. International financing. It's already dried up for fossil fuels. In fact, I took this from our energy policy which we approved last year. If our support will go to renewable energy efficiency, accelerated decommissioning of coal power plants, smart power systems, digitalization in power systems, innovative technologies, and natural gas only now as a transitional fuel. It will not last forever. Maybe during the next 5 years, we may be able to do natural gas. Then afterwards, no money for natural gas either. And leverage. And the other thing is we are trying to leverage private sector capital as much as possible using sovereign financing. And low carbon development we will help, and no support for new coal power plants, and very limited support, as I said, for gas and oil. So this is the overall international financing scenario for in the energy sector or power sector in particular. So a few final remarks. What does this all this mean? Policymakers, regulators, utilities, consumers, investors, all of us will have to work together. We have to come together. We cannot be, blaming each other for their own, mistakes or drawbacks, because everybody has contributed to the current situation. Everybody will have to contribute positively to take the situation into a better level and to move forward. So everybody has, issues. Everybody will have to work together to get these issues resolved. Financial sustainability. Nobody talks about this. Nobody talks about CEB going bankrupt and the blame is going to CEB. No, it is CEB, of course, has its own fault because of inefficiency in operations and so on. But the tariffs, if you are going to get electricity, you have to pay for the cost of electricity. If your cost of electricity now is 75 rupees, if you pay only 16 rupees per unit, what do you expect from CEB? A bankrupt utility is affecting renewable energy development, because this utility will have to pay for the electricity put into the system by the developers. If it does not have money, how is the utility going to pay? So cost reflective tariff is a must. At the same time, we have to remember, we have to have cost reflective power purchase agreements. Renewable energy will have to be paid for their costs. You should not be expecting as an investor to make huge profits or thumping profits at the expense of the consumer or the utility or the government. You should be paid what you spend on that, including of course financing cost and your reasonable return on investment and so on. But the problem in our part of the world is that investors expect huge profits and the government does not increase the tariffs. And where are we going to land? That's a problem in the electricity, huge issue in the electricity. Therefore, institutional reforms is important, strengthening independence of the institutions. But I'll tell you, with my experience, is strengthening independence in the rule in the legal framework is not adequate. You have to make sure that you have right people sitting in those institutions who can exercise independence. If these independent institutions do not exercise independence, then the whole purpose of having independence in law is no use. Then a political appointment, which is very difficult to come by in Sri Lanka. They are all political appointments. All the heads of government institutions are political appointments. The chairmen, director generals, and so on. Okay, they can be political appointments, but once they are appointed, they should behave apolitically, so that the institution can be taken forward. And we need to develop capacity in those institutions to accommodate the developmental requirements. So these are few thoughts. I think I took little more than half an hour, I promised you. And I hope this was useful. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Priyantha, for a very, very informative talk about the current electricity situation in Sri Lanka, what some of the causes might be, what some of the solutions could be as well. And we can see from the number of questions that have come through how interesting your talk has been. So I don't want to spend any more time and get into the questions as quickly as possible and cover as many as we can. We have 15 to 20 minutes for those questions. So I'll turn to the first one from Kirti Devendra. And he says, solar power, the technology has been available for many, many years. And why is it that it has not been, exploited, tapped more extensively in the last 25 years?
Yes, it has been there, I think, for many, many years. I can remember the, major solar drive was in 1980s during President Jayawardena's time. And it has been there at the time. Of course, it was very costly. Eventually the cost matters. Who can pay for it? Unless you have subsidized costs or the facilities are subsidized. That's why it took a long time. Now the cost, it has come to grid parity. So now it's time we can have that accelerated development. I think that's the reason why it has not taken off, and it should take off. It should take off now.
Great. A further question is, you mentioned that the current strategy is to convert existing coal power plants to natural gas, but that would mean that we have to then import natural gas, just like we have to import coal and oil for current energy requirements. So are we importing another problem?
Yes, I agree. But then, mind you, when it comes to system requirements, of course, the coal power plants in the long-term plan, I think the existing coal power plant, it's not that easy to replace with natural gas. But when it comes to system requirements, you need certain amount of stable power. Otherwise, you will have to have renewable energy with storage. Storage is still costly put together. But as I told you, I mean, it's not going to be a long-term solution. It may be the transition time, in the next 5 years or so, what we put up. Then afterwards, we may have to directly go into, renewable energy. So you are right. That also should be imported, and eventually, we will be relying on imported energy and the dollar issues. will come in, but then there is no other solution rather than doing that for the next few years. Because that's obviously cheaper than, obviously better than coal in terms of environmental sustainability, cheaper than oil. So that's where we are at the moment.
As you said, it's a requirement for transition, isn't it?
Yes,
thank you, Priyantha, and thank you, Kirti, for those questions. Question from Professor Dharmadasa. So you mentioned he mentions that, the issue with space. I think, Priyantha, you talked about Sri Lanka being a very dense country in terms of population. And Professor Dharmadas says, yes, definitely fertile lands in Sri Lanka should not be covered with solar panels. And what about the rooftops? Can they be used as a solution?
Yeah, you are very right, Professor Dharmadas. It's nice to see you. I think I have seen you many, many years ago. I can't remember when it was. And yes, and you're right. I mean, I think solar rooftop we should really vigorously pursue. And in fact, we have quite a good solar rooftop program in Sri Lanka. In fact, Asian Development Bank has been funding a credit line. We were going to top up that credit line recently, but because of the financial situation, we are not really going through it now. But yes, solar rooftop is the best solution. And the land or ground-mounted solar, frankly speaking, personally, I don't prefer, simply because Sri Lanka, all the lands in Sri Lanka are fertile. When I went to India, I can still remember they were asking me when I said we have this dry zone. They were telling me, where is your dry zone? Because you don't get dry zones like what you have in India, in Sri Lanka. Everywhere it's a wet zone for them. So that's why ground-mounted solar has its own issues, because there is a lot of alternate users for that land.
Yes, and this relates to another question as well from Jayanta Pereira, that yes, you have rooftop roofs that can be used, but there are also buildings and hospitals, factories, businesses. All these roofs can be used for solar energy generation. And we've had, for instance, the Surya Bala Sangrame, which is a rooftop for households, but there are many other spaces that can be used. And do you know why there's not a larger initiative to promote such spaces?
Actually, it has taken off. If you look at some of the big companies, they have been putting up a lot of solar rooftops all over their factories and so on. Major food, this supermarket chains, they are doing it too. Actually, one of the incentives we have to provide to them is this buyback price. Of course, until recently, it's 22 rupees per unit. It's very attractive, but it's very bad for Ceylon Electricity Board, because when they sell at 16 and buy at 22, where is the incentive for the CEB to do this? That's where I said you have to get your tariffs right. And you and I, of course, those who are in Sri Lanka, should not be subsidized. Why should I be subsidized? I'm a subsidized customer in Sri Lanka if I'm in Sri Lanka. But Sri Lankan, almost everybody, I mean, about 60 to 70% of the consumers subsidized. Why should they be? I mean, it can be the 10% difficult one or the 20% difficult really needed ones, but not others. So it's an issue. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you, Priyantha, for that. You mentioned the institutional inertia, and that's the way you put it. And the question from Ajit Veerasinghe is, what can we do to fix the issue as far as maybe the CEB not supporting this transition to renewable energy? He talks about the elephant in the room. But yes, what is your response, Priyantha, to that?
One thing, as I said, why should they connect more renewable energy when they sell at 16 and buy at 22? Number one. So if they have a proper tariff for the consumers, I'm sure they will have some incentive to connect. Because if you buy at 22, if they can sell at 30, they make a little bit of money, right? So that there is one incentive. The second is, in fact, you need to really, reform CEB, frankly. In fact, we are now considering a policy-based loan to Sri Lanka energy sector, which will have to be, processed with policy conditions. And we are trying to bring in certain policies which might eventually help institutional restructuring, which eventually helps, the investors and the developers and eventually the sector. For instance, if you take an example, in LECO, it's much easier to get your solar rooftop connected and much faster as against dealing with Ceylon Electricity Board. I don't know how many people from Ceylon Electricity Board is connected here, must be mad at me, but I have to say that it's nothing wrong with Ceylon Electricity Board, it's simply their bureaucracy within. Whereas with LECO, it's much simpler because it's a distribution company, flat management structure, it's easier to get things done faster. And as against CEB. So we need to really look at the management structure and possible decentralized or flat management structure and reforms in structural reforms.
Thank you, Priyantha. What about the cost of moving to renewable energy? You mentioned how sometimes there are issues with storage. Sometimes you don't get the same efficiency when you move to renewable energy. But also, what about the cost? How does that come in?
If you compare kilowatt hour costs, obviously they are pretty competitive. But the problem is kilowatt hour, the kilowatt hours from conventional and renewable energy are not the same when it comes to quality of kilowatt hour because of the intermittency and so on. So when you put storage into it, it may not be that cheap, but there is certainly a level of renewable energy which you can absorb without additional cost in terms of storage in a system. Maybe 10 to 20% of the total energy requirements can easily be supplied without additional cost in the system. So at least we should try to meet that or to bring that level of renewable energy. Then we can start thinking of storage part of it to supply. But Sri Lanka has a quite a good portion of storage hydro, which can be used to support renewable energy. So Sri Lanka can absorb quite a big proportion of renewable energy without additional investments in storage. But Sri Lanka also looking at pump storage, 2 pump storage power plant to my knowledge. And in fact, we supported Sri Lanka Electricity Board to do some of the feasibility studies. And I think with that, obviously renewable energy proportion can go up.
Okay, so related question from Anurag Samarasinghe. He talks about, in this country, we have a commitment to go to net zero by 2050. It's sort of a rallying call of the government in terms of fighting the climate crisis. How practical is that for Sri Lanka from a cost? But also this, you talked about the transition that's needed. And you also talked about, biomass, right? 50% of consumption of energy still, being biomass related. So how practical is the net zero transition by 2050?
It's not easy. It's a tough task. And particularly if you know, only so many countries have committed to neutrality by 2050. If you look at India is 2070. If you look at China, it's 2060. And Sri Lanka is 2050. And of course, Nepal is 2045. And so it's a tough task, but it's possible, but it costs money. Technology is there. If you have the money, if you have the technology, then you can do it. It's not easy. It's not easy under the current circumstances. Of course, biomass is not a major issue, Priyantha, because biomass is already carbon neutral. Because when you grow biomass, it absorbs, and when you, when you, burn it, you emit it. So in a way, provided that biomass comes from sustainable biomass plantations, then you have to have enough plantation. Then you have supply chain issues. So these are not easy. And but biomass bit is not that difficult. The difficult part is the transport part. That's huge. And getting e-mobility is not that easy.
And what is the link between deforestation and biomass usage in Sri Lanka? I mean, any response to that?
Yeah, I don't know whether there is any forester in the audience, but to my knowledge, our biomass is quite sustainable actually in Sri Lanka. I don't think we are really, deforestation is a major issue in terms of biomass supplies to various energy requirements. Yeah.
Okay. Question from Leslie Adept. What is your view in terms of green hydrogen as a renewable source of energy for Sri Lanka?
No, that's fantastic. In fact, even institutions like ADB is vigorously pursuing this. It is still costly, but there are, transport sector. If you want to, decarbonize the transport sector, that's the only way to move forward. Like e-mobility, you need things like hydrogen, and certain industries cannot function without something like green hydrogen. So green hydrogen is probably the way forward as it stands now.
And what's the how do you enable that? What's the investment? Because it's a new type of energy source.
Yeah,
infrastructure for that.
That's right. And we need to, of course, certain countries are now, for instance, India has a hydrogen mission, and they are really they are going in a significant way into hydrogen. Yes, it's still costly, and we may need the institution like Asian Development Bank coming in to do pilots and to demonstrate so that small countries can pick it up. But still costly at the moment. But I think initial investments will have to come from concessionary financing sources, which I am sure government, the countries like Sri Lanka can tap. We have a lot of different sources, climate financing sources, like climate investment funds, and those sources can be tapped. Even grant funding can be tapped, and countries like India tap those resources.
Going back to Sri Lanka is facing a currently a foreign exchange crisis, energy crisis, gas. It's so we have to look at the short term as well. I mean, we talk about the renewable energy transition 2030, 2050, but people are suffering incredibly right now. Any views about how the energy crisis in Sri Lanka can be resolved in the short term? And this is a question from Mahesh De Silva.
Yeah, there is no easy solution, frankly, because if it is short and immediate, the only way we can do is to pump oil to these power plants. That's the only thing, but we don't have dollars. That's the issue. So at least in a small way, the way we can contribute is, to the extent possible, get your solar systems in place and at least use them by yourselves. In fact, I was just proposing, even the unfortunate part is because of the power interruptions, you cut off distribution lines. So the solar power plants or rooftops connected to distribution lines are unutilized during power cuts. You cannot. So we are trying to work with LECO to come up with some technology solution to make sure that at least solar power within each of the feeder can be utilized by the houses connected within the feeder. So it's a small technology solution which you can bring in with the existing technologies and some software. And we are trying, Asian Development Bank is trying to finance a small pilot so that this can be expanded. At least what is available can be utilized. At the moment, no, with the power cuts, the distribution lines where these solar systems are connected, those solar systems cannot be used and will not come into the system. So as much as possible, use your solar systems and find a way to use them in some form or the other.
Sure. And in fact, you mentioned, solar is a main way of alternative to the current energy sources we're using. You mentioned something like 2,000 megawatts of energy is something that are currently in the plans. But solar can only be produced during the day. And so even when you move to full renewable energy, there'll be constraints like that. I know storage might be a solution. Any thoughts about those kinds of issues that you can't have 24-hour solar power generation?
Yeah, as I said, that's an issue. But if you have storage in the system somewhere, system can be your storage. For instance, if you take, if I take the example from India, India doesn't care about it because they have enough storage in the system. They have storage power plants, hydropower plants. So if somebody, I pump in solar power during the daytime, I get back my solar power in the night time because it's stored in Victoria Power Station. So why should I worry? So as long as you have storage in the system somewhere, you can use it. But that may not be true beyond a certain limit. Then afterwards, you have to bring in additional storage in the form of pump storage or battery storage and so on. That's when we have to really worry about. At the moment, I don't think it's such an issue. If you can, there are technology solutions associated with any other stability issues, but storage is not going to be a major issue at the moment. That's my feeling.
Thank you, Priyantha. We have actually Professor Dharmadasa who would like to raise a question to you. So over to you, Professor Dharmadasa.
Thank you, Gihanta. Thank you, Priyantha. Good to see you. Thank you for the presentation. I just want to make few comments on my experience in Sri Lanka. In 1990, I just came out from BP solar panel commercialization program. I saw that it's maturing. So when I came to the university, I started a higher education link program for about 6 years. We established an internal academic network, and we started to promote renewables in Sri Lanka. In 1992, starting from 1992, we had a series of conferences. We invited CEB policymaker to come and tell us what is their policy. And at the end of the presentation, what the policymaker said was, future of Sri Lanka is coal, coal, and coal. We were shocked. We were shocked. So that was my 1992 experience. And then we were talking to government ministers and then business people. There were only 3 companies. Now today there are 60 companies active in the country. So it is developing. But the government was very slow to take. But even recently, government installed 40 megawatt of solar roofs, and the renewable energy minister last March announced in the parliament saying that we have 40 megawatt solar roofs, but CEB has taken 2 years to connect them. They are still not connected. I say that this is the resistance. You absolutely said that 1980s solar was expensive, but this is last March. Now the solar energy is cheaper, and the government was trying to help poor people. And we still see this, and you mentioned clean energy needs to be accelerated, but the CEB applying brakes, not accelerating, deaccelerating. So that is our problem. I will tell you, there are so many examples I have. I have spoken to many senior people, including ex-chairman of CEB, Mr. Ferdinand, and I have spoken to everybody. Every year, sometimes I went 2 or 3 times to the country. I was talking to these senior people. And we have a project called Solar Village. This is my last example. There are so many if I want to give. We install a 6 kilowatt solar roof in Nochia Solar Village on Net Plus scheme. To get the first check, Leslie, Depp, and myself had to struggle 6 months. We had to write 2 or 3 letters to the Prime Minister's office, through Prime Minister's office, to the CEB chairman. And it took 6 months to get the first check. So we consider this as deacceleration, applying brakes. So this is the sad situation in Sri Lanka. If we improved from 1990 onwards, last 30 years, we have tremendous amount of solar energy in the country now. Solar and wind and hydro, and 30 years, 3 decades. That is the sad situation. So unfortunately, we had a company with negative attitude towards renewables. That is my personal, and it is not only my personal, in Sri Lankan academic communities experience. Thank you.
I don't think I have to respond to it as such. I fully agree with you. But of course, there are many factors contributing to it. As I said, obviously it's system inertia, not only that, but also, as I told you, the tariff, the consumer tariff. Where is the incentive for them? There is no incentive for them. Actually, I had a friend, general manager many years ago, who told me, Priyantha, why is the incentive for CEB to supply consumers? There is no incentive because my sale unit of sale is cheaper than the cost of supply. So it's better for me to cut all the supply lines. That will make CEB better off. So that was his I mean, I'm not saying that that is the way to move forward, but we need to address many of those issues if you want, if you have to move forward. Yeah.
Thank you, Priyantha. One quick comment is when they generate electricity from diesel, they pay about 45 rupees per unit.
Now,
But,
now 100 now about 100 rupees a unit.
Now for solar, our average is about 18. It is 22 for the first 7 years, and after that it is 15 something. So average is about 18. So that way, renewable is cheaper.
Yeah, exactly. Now there is an incentive because now even 22 is cheaper. So it's cheaper than oil. So that's why they are going for it. Yes.
Thank you, Professor Dharmadasa, and thank you, Priyantha, for your answers. So we are approaching the end of the webinar. We have a few more minutes. And so I will again like to bring your attention, Priyantha, to a couple of more questions. So you're with the ADB, and clearly you're very involved with some of the infrastructure projects in India, in Sri Lanka. And the question is from Lal Samarsekera is there financial assistance from the ADB and the World Bank to support Sri Lanka in the transition to renewable energy?
Yes, we have been actually providing support to Sri Lanka for the last so many years. Every year or every other year, we were bringing in 200 million, 250 million a year. But unfortunately, during the last few years, no, because of the financial issues in Sri Lanka. As you know, when you have financial issues, credit rating going down, it's hard for us to come in with money also. So we are waiting for the IMF program to come, both World Bank and ADB, to pump in more money for the energy sector. So we are waiting for it, and we really would help. But it's difficult to bring in money when IMF is not there at the moment. And people don't realize the importance of IMF coming in, because neither World Bank, no ADB, or no other multilateral bank can come in if you don't have IMF program at the moment because of the current situation.
Okay, thank you, Priyantha. Also, I mean, it's really interesting, we often criticize the CEB for the issues. I think we had a spirited conversation about that just now, but also you have flagged, apart from that inertia that we see, there is this issue of subsidy, and we see that it's not only with energy, right? We see that in many other sectors of the country. So how do we resolve that? How can we get consumers also, or how can we help consumers to understand that they also have a role in moving to a more sustainable use of energy? Effectively, they will have to either curtail or find other different ways, or be willing to put up with the higher cost. How can we do that?
Yeah, again, actually, it's the fault is on our part in that sense. We have not been doing our job properly. These increases will have to be gradual. People cannot take shocks. So you can't wait 15 years to increase electricity tariffs when the rupee is going down, rupee value is going down, and the cost of supply is going up. So this has to be done on a continuous basis. We have not done that. So one way to make sure that you bring this back as a regular price increase rather than giving shocks, and make people aware the importance of it, because every subsidized rupee will have to be supported by everybody in the country. So if I am going to enjoy a subsidy, everybody in this country pays, in Sri Lanka pays. Why should I be paid by all these poor people from their bread and what vegetables, whatever they buy? So they have to be made aware that everybody is paying for these subsidies, not CEB or anybody else. Everybody is paying on. And the second is, in fact, you have to have regulatory institutions strengthened. The regulator will have to take lead in adjusting these tariffs. If you look at telecom tariffs, everybody pays, even the poorest of the poor pay the telecom, right charges. They are not subsidized. They all pay the cost of service, except electricity. Even now, petroleum prices all gone up. Let's say 450 rupees a liter. I pay, but I pay still electricity the same 16 rupees per unit, when it is 100 rupees a unit or 50 rupees a unit. So there is something really wrong in this whole system, and which I think we have to make people aware that subsidies mean it's a burden for everybody. Whereas if the cost of supply is paid as a price, then the user pays. That is the best solution to most of these issues. And we have to make them aware. And then the people, the politicians should have the guts to tell that to people and increase the tariffs. And then, of course, you have to bring in subsidies for the needy people. That there is no issue. And I don't think even IMF will say increase tariffs, but don't look after these poor people. Without a safety net, they will never ask you to increase tariffs.
Thank you. So final question is, you mentioned also, there has to be institutional reform. And, it could, whether it's corruption or whether it's inertia, there has to be institutional reform. You're in a very unique position, Priyantha, because, having now worked in Sri Lanka, but also at ADB, you've seen how other countries are progressing. There are countries that were far further underdeveloped compared to Sri Lanka, who are now doing considerably better. What are the lessons we can draw from some of these other Asian countries? We see India doing huge amounts when it comes to moving towards renewable energy, even though coal is still a significant part of how they produce their energy. Are there any examples you can take from the Asian experience that can help Sri Lanka progress to a better place? I'm talking specifically about institutional reform.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to look far. Just see what India has done. Look at what Bangladesh has done. I mean, I have been working in South Asia region for years before I moved to the new position, and everybody has progressed much more than Sri Lanka in institutional reforms. And India, you have regulators in every state, almost every state except some northeastern states. And every state, the utilities are unbundled into distribution, transmission, and generation. And in fact, generation is a de-licensed activity now. You don't need a license to generate in India. Anybody can generate and sell power to anybody if there is a buyer. And open access to transmission, the network services has been there in India even before structural reforms. Way back in 80s, 90s, they had open access to transmission network. So huge, enough examples all over the place. And Sri Lanka is really lagging behind in institutional reforms, I think many, many decades, at least, 20, 30 years. And I was in Sri Lanka just a couple of weeks ago. I was talking to electricity board, my colleagues. Interestingly, my age group is now right at the top of the management of CEB. So it's interesting. And I told them, you have to do something. You cannot stay like this. And it's 50 years since CEB was established, rather 53 years. In 1969, they established CEB. No institution can be like that, the same structure remaining for 50 years. That's too long. And we need to do something. And just to add to the cost of supply, actually, they were telling me their revenue per year will go only to import coal, not to do anything else in the system. Can you imagine? And they are spending 750 billion rupees, and they will earn only 250 billion rupees. And the rest is all losses.
Right.
That's huge.
So what are then your top 3 recommendations to change the situation, Priyantha? I know there are so many, but what would you say are the 3 top priorities as a country, as a government, but also as a people? What are the top 3 things we need to do for a successful transition to renewable energy?
Number one, first and foremost, they should really, revise the tariffs to cost of supply, because otherwise there cannot be renewable energy, because there is no buyer who can pay for the renewable energy which is going to come onto the system, because the single buyer is bankrupt. So you have to revise the tariffs. And number 2, you have to find technical solutions to make sure that even during this, few months and years of power cuts, to bring this renewable energy as much as possible onto the system without an interruption. There can be a power interruption, but we should bring this, it's a double damage otherwise, right? You have renewable energy. So that's the second one. Third, of course, you really need to look at institutional reforms and strengthening the regulator particularly. Okay.
And again, linked to institutional reform, what about the political support? Do you think there's political support for this transition? This is
I
a
would
question in
like to-
relation. This is a question from Madon Fernando.
That, of course, I doubt. I don't know whether there is.
Excuse
you
me,
know,
excuse me, Gihant, I had my hand raised for about 20 minutes.
Yeah, you're next, Kirti.
Yeah, please go ahead. Shall I
Kirti, hold,
answer the
yeah, Kirti, hold on. Let Priyantha finish
Yeah.
the response, and you're definitely next.
I really would like to see politicians who have the guts to take the institutional reforms through. Frankly speaking, we had politicians like that, but they never survived because people never wanted such politicians. Unfortunately, it's a very unfortunate situation in Sri Lanka. The politicians who really would like to do reforms, they will not come to power, or they are chased out of power. And so I hope the current regime may be able to do it because there is no other choice, at least. Now we are basically pushed against the wall.
Thank you, Priyantha. So, Kirti, you will be the final question. Thank you very much for your patience. Once Kirti's discussion with Priyantha is concluded, we will come to the end of this webinar. Kirti, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Gihant. In fact, I was going to have only one question, but I now have two questions. One is, I think Priyantha mentioned the fact that in the early days, the CEB had to pay 22 rupees per unit, whereas the amount of money they were getting was 18. Now, in that sort of situation, in the developed countries, the government steps in, they see the long-term future, they see the long-term advantage and do something to adjust the situation. So why hasn't it happened in Sri Lanka? That's one thing question. The second thing is, of course, we have to learn from all these things so that we can prevent something similar happening in the future. So if we can go back 25 years, what 3 key policies would you implement 25 years ago to avoid the crisis today? I don't know if does my question make sense?
Yes, yes, of course, it makes real sense. The second question is difficult to find an answer. But the first one, if I say, yes, this is exactly what we expect from a government. And right in the case of any other country, even in a place like Nepal, you have what we call, gap financing. And that difference is brought in by the government. And that doesn't happen. If you look at, this is the problem in our country, that you have the Electricity Act in Sri Lanka, which clearly says that any subsidy which the utility is expected to put in for the consumer will have to come from the government. Otherwise, the utility will not be able to survive. But here, though it's in the League Act, it never came in. And if you look at what has been happening in the past, CEB never got a subsidy. From time to time, of course, ad hoc monies were coming in, but otherwise no proper systematic approach to it. The second, 25 years ago, what I would have done, perhaps I would have implemented the power plants as expected in the generation expansion plan. Then, of course, the situation would have been, we would have had no coal power plant. But that, leaving that part aside, at least we would have had a power system with overall cost much lower than what we have now. And now you have so many oil-fired power plants because we never implemented the generation plan. Therefore, ad hoc generation comes in the form of oil generation, because that's the fastest way to put in a power plant, oil-fired power plant. You can just buy off the shelf most of the diesel power plants, and then you put it up and end up with paying all this cost. So we would have had, if we implemented the generation expansion plan in time, in a timely manner, we wouldn't have faced this issue. And if the politicians did not interfere with those plans, which interference has been always the case, and then we would have had no issues with power cuts or power interruptions now.
Thank you.
I don't know whether there should be a second and a third one.
Okay, no, thank you very much indeed. Obviously, we have to learn a lot and we have to implement many changes in Sri Lanka. And I hope we'll get some changes in place as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you,
I
Kirti.
hope so. Yeah.
Okay, so this has been an extremely informative webinar. Lots of different aspects have been discussed. What's interesting is, whilst the urgency for the switch to renewable energy is there, it is also clear that there is going to be a transition, and we will need a mixed use of energy to get to renewable energy in a sort of a practical way. So there is certainly a transition, but certainly we will need also not just one a person or one sector of the economy. It's also interesting from what Priyantha has said that there's a role for everybody. So certainly CEB, that role has been highlighted. The support of the politicians and the government is critical. But we can also see that, yes, the people will also need to be more educated about the use of renewable energy, but also the cost, and be willing to take part in that transition. So that will also have to be looked at. Everyone, as Priyantha mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, has to come together to make this transition possible. So I, at this point, again, like to thank Priyantha Wijayatunga, the head of the energy unit covering climate change and sustainable development at ADB, to have given his time, but also his fantastic knowledge and experience in this sector, sharing that with us today. And also, definitely, I want to thank everyone who's participated to make this a very interesting webinar. Including, of course, we have also the presence from the Sri Lankan High Commission as well, Dr. Lakmin Mendis. And that is all. I would also say APSL's very important contribution to this is investment in solar villages. So you heard from Professor Dharmadas as well, who is the brainchild of the solar village movement. But if you would like to support APSL to develop more solar villages across Sri Lanka, and as Priyantha mentioned, it's the low-income sector that really needs support with the energy transition. So please do join us. Write to us at APSL or WE SRI LANKA at apsl.org.uk, and certainly we will then work with you and help Sri Lanka more in the transition to renewable energy. I close my thoughts there, and I would now like to ask the General Secretary of APSL, newly elected, Sanjay Kurituwakku, to kindly give the vote of thanks and conclude the webinar. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
I really hope you can all hear me. I must just say, what an amazing presentation by Dr. Priyantha Wijayatunga. That was absolutely amazing. I think, like every dark cloud has a silver lining. Maybe the struggle that Sri Lanka is going through at the moment, and the energy crisis it's facing, may give us a turning point towards the right direction. So I would like to thank Dr. Priyantha Wijayatunga, Chief of Energy Sector Group at the Asian Development Bank. I would like to thank you for taking the time to enhance our knowledge and bring awareness to this critical issue that Sri Lanka is Sri Lanka. It was very interesting to know the composition of Sri Lankan energy sector challenges and what renewable energy options we have in overcoming the power and climate crisis in Sri Lanka. Thank you, Dr. Wijayatunga. Today we also have Dr. Lakmin Mendis from the Sri Lankan High Commission, as always, supporting us in these sort of webinars. Thank you for taking the time in joining us today. I would like to thank Mr. Gyanta Jayasinghe, the project lead, together with the Sri Lankan, together with WE SRI LANKA team for organizing this amazing webinar. You have brought it alive, kept the energy high, and we all benefited out of it. Thank you very much. Last but not least, I would like to thank all of the participants who have joined us today. You have enhanced today's webinar by asking vital eye-opening questions. And before I leave today's event, if you are currently not an APSL member, please consider joining us so that you can be part of the work we do towards the development of Sri Lanka. With that in mind, let me once again thank you all and say goodbye until we meet in this sort of a webinar again. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for everyone for coming, and hopefully we should have a recording given out at some point. So thanks for spending the afternoon today. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.